It sounds like a lot of my life, because I went from machining into the sciences, and it doesn't seem like a very intuitive thing, but a door opened and I just went for it.
And now you're here.
And now I'm here, yeah. And it's just, you saw the acting thing, and that could lead into the modeling, all this other cool stuff. And then all of this just kind of feeds back into, you're like, oh, yes, I'm used to being on a camera. I remember all that stumbling that I did.
Yes.
Get it out of the way now.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's just dive into this. Let's talk about anti-nutrients then.
Okay, anti-nutrients. Yeah, so think about this. You're a little caterpillar.
I am a caterpillar.
You're a caterpillar, right? Very hungry caterpillar. And you find a little leaf and you start eating it. Well, we think caterpillar's alive, but so is the leaf, right? Leaves, plants, they're made out of cells. Humans are made out of cells. Cells are responding. So when that caterpillar starts to eat the leaf responds. And in some cases, the leaf can produce pheromones that attracts a predator to kill the caterpillar. So it'll tell a wasp, hey, there's a little caterpillar here, like, come get breakfast, right? And leaves can respond in a variety of ways. Lots of plants respond in a variety of ways because they don't want to be eaten. They're alive. They're living tissues, right? So if a giraffe is eating a leaf, it can start producing tannins, which makes it taste bad. It's bitter, right? Plants can develop waxes. They can get thicker. They can grow thorns. They can produce compounds, as you mentioned, with anti-nutrients that prevent you from absorbing minerals. It can start chelating your own minerals out of you. So if you're a little ant and you're munching away on something, and then day 2, day 3, you're trying to eat away and you're like, oh, I don't feel so good, you're going to stop eating it, right? Compounds like lectins can actually destroy your gut barrier. So it's not going to take many eatings or settings of the same plant, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, I don't like that. But we're humans. We're a whole lot bigger than a caterpillar or an ant, right? So it takes us longer to realize that, but it's important to realize that animals can run, they can fight, they can burrow, they can physically move. Plants are stuck. So they have to be able to respond, and the way they do that is by creating these anti-nutrients that make you not want to eat them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty crafty defense mechanism.
Yeah.
So are there like different types of anti-nutrients, or is it just kind of like one anti-nutrient for all plants across the board?
No, there's a whole variety.
Okay.
You think of how diverse the plant kingdom is and how diverse insects are. There's oxalates, there's phytates, there's tannins, there's a whole host of these different compounds or nutrients, even some polyphenols. Usually you think of a polyphenol and it's an antioxidant or it's anti-inflammatory or it's good for you. But it can also bind to a protein, like a digestive enzyme, and prevent you from being able to break down your food, which can later cause digestive problems.
Interesting. So then you don't want to eat that plant in the future.
So then you don't want to eat that plant, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
and
makes
so
sense.
if you're a bug, an insect, right, something in the animal kingdom, and you come across something and you forage on it, after you eat it for a while, like the giraffe and the leaves, at some point it starts to taste bad. So then you're going to stop eating it and you're going to go find some other leaf. Or you're going to go somewhere upwind and start eating, right? But with humans, we can just go to the grocery store, or you can grow something in your garden. We don't typically eat the same foods over and over and over like we used to when you had to grow your foods, or it's tomato season and you're just eating and eating and eating all these tomatoes. Well, tomatoes contain lectins. In the skin and in the seeds, those lectins will actually cause leaky gut. They'll puncture, they'll rupture your gut barrier.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, so this idea, even, and some of popular foods, right? Your coffees, your teas, your red wines, chocolate, or the cacao, they contain tannins, and tannins will prevent the absorption of things like iron and zinc and calcium and copper. So if there's already not a whole lot of nutrients, mineral-wise, in our food, or our food system's geared in such a way that it kind of bypasses a lot of the normal communication pathways and our digestive enzymes, and then we're eating these foods that we think is healthy, or we're trying to get healthier, so we start eating healthy foods, And we're not aware that plants also don't want to be eaten. And now we're not absorbing nutrients, or we're eating certain foods like the cruciferous vegetables. So you start eating broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and you're like, oh, I don't like it, and you're scarfing it down. Well, that first bite of flavor, it's like a bomb of anti-nutrients. And then there's other compounds in there that can actually prevent you from absorbing minerals like iodine. So then all of a sudden you start having thyroid problems. And it's tied back to your diet.
Interesting. Yeah, when I think about like eating like healthy wise, probably one of the first things that comes to my mind is like leafy greens. That makes sense that anti-nutrients would kind of be the culprit there. But are there like things that you can do to mitigate the risks with vegetables? Like can you cook out anti-nutrients, or can you prepare food in such a way that kind of takes out the negative side effects of anti-nutrients?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And some of them are already kind of built into things that we would do, like tomatoes. They contain the lectins. But when you heat it, when you make a tomato sauce, you chop up your tomatoes, you puree, you mix them in, and you let it simmer. You put all those, the oregano and Italian seasoning and all those herbs in there that are also powerful antioxidants, and you let it cook. That heating aspect breaks some of those down. Some are a little more resilient. So like lectins, they do tend to fight back a bit. Obviously, like coffees and teas, you heat water and you add that so it's hot, and they still remain. But your oxalates and your phytates are a little more temperature sensitive. So you can heat them, you can steam them. My favorite go-tos are sprouting and fermenting.
Okay, go into that a little bit more. Like sprouting, are you talking about sprouts in general, or are you talking about the process in which like seeds and beans and whatever reproduce?
So the actual sprout. So if you take a seed and you're going to plant it, you put it in the dirt. As soon as it pops up, that's your sprout.
Right, before it's a fully fledged.
Yeah, before it's a plant, before it starts to grow its other leaves and starts to establish a root base. At this point, it's pulling the majority of its nutrients from the seed, and so it's not fighting back as much against whatever could be in the soil that could be preventing it. And if you think about it, this makes sense too, because if, as a gardener, you plant your seeds, you're usually putting it in a rich nutrient soil in a little greenhouse and everything's happy, or it was eaten by an animal, the seed was consumed, now it's mixed in with fertilizer and dropped somewhere, and now it's got everything it needs to grow. So it's in a slightly more protected area. So traditionally, sprouts haven't had to fight back. So the idea is as soon as it sprouts, it doesn't have a lot of these
Defense
mechanisms in place, yeah. But it still has a lot of those beneficial effects. So broccoli sprouts are one of my favorite for that reason.
Okay. We were talking a little bit earlier about this, and you mentioned that like a handful of sprouts is worth like a pound of broccoli, right?
Yeah.
In terms of nutrients.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, because so one of the beautiful things about broccoli and why you see it on a traditional, weightlifting, heavy muscle building.
Yeah, chicken, rice, and broccoli.
Right, yeah, that's like the go-to, right? So the broccoli has a couple unique compounds in it that are great for healing, growing, building, repairing. Mm-hmm. One of them is sulforaphane. Sulforaphane turns on gene expression to prevent carcinogens.
Okay.
And to help your body detox. There's kind of two phases, phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways.
And carcinogens are potentially cancerous compounds.
Correct.
Okay.
And those compounds, like the sulforaphanes, are much more dense in sprouts. So then you're getting that benefit that you get from sprouts, from broccoli, but then you don't have those oxalates and phytates in a high enough concentration where it's really harming you. The other thing is that you'll notice that part of that chicken, rice and broccoli, is that they'll steam or they'll cook the broccoli. Because again, the act of heating it starts to get rid of some of those anti-nutrients.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you eat all raw, all vegetables, beans, whole grains, oats, rye, you're maxing the amount of anti-nutrients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there So we talked about like potentially cooking some of these anti-nutrients out or preparing food in a way that mitigates that. Can you pair anti-nutrients with something that would negate the effects of them?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, okay.
Right. So if you have something like a phytate or an oxalate, and it binds iron and it binds calcium and magnesium, then you can eat a food that's rich in a source of calcium or iron, right? So this idea of pairing, your broccoli or your beans or oats and grains, potatoes, with a steak, very rich in iron. It's got iron to spare. Mm-hmm. Well, to kind of segue in, we know that meats also have some deleterious effects. Charring them creates carcinogens. So then you pair the steak with the broccoli that's been cooked. The cooking reduces the anti-nutrients, and then you're using those, like the sulforaphane compounds, to mitigate the carcinogens created from searing the steak.
Okay. So the burnt part of the steak, like you said, the charred part of the
Yeah.
steak, that is the carcinogenic part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it creates ACEs, so these advanced glycation endpoints, where in essence the sugar and the proteins mix together in a way that creates the carcinogens. And then it creates these TAMOs. It's like a trimethyl amino acid. It's one of the amino acids. So it's TAMO for short. And those are associated with like cardiovascular issues.
Okay.
So the idea of eating lots and lots of meat can, give you these carcinogen-like compounds, increase certain inflammatory markers, and you're dramatically increasing the amount of nitrogen, which if you're not drinking enough water and getting enough salt can cause dehydration. So meat's not perfect in its own regard, right? And if you don't cook the meat, it can have other deleterious effects, right? Chicken and salmonella, even sushi.
Worms.
Right?
Yeah.
So the idea of cooking your food makes it safer, but then by cooking it, you're creating a bad side effect.
Yeah.
So you can pair it with something else. The other thing is dairy, right? So nuts and seeds, really high in these phytates and oxalates. The same with like oats.
Okay.
So your yogurts, cheese, right? If you have nuts and seeds, you can also have cheese or dairy or yogurt. The oats, they kind of pair well, and they complement from that nutrient, anti-nutrient. Because if it's preventing calcium absorption, but you're eating dairy and there's tons of calcium there, then you're kind of outweighing the amount of calcium present. So you can lose a little.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we're just kind of trying to avoid all forms of extreme dieting when it comes to a certain category of the food pyramid. Right? Like don't go all in on carnivore. Don't go all in on vegan or vegetarianism or whatever it is. Have a little bit of everything, but in moderation.
I guess moderation's key for most things. There definitely have been a multitude of publications that have come out recently looking at heavy keto or heavy carnivore diet. And I've elucidated to the benefit there where you're providing those essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and minerals. And when you are void of those essentials in your diet, and then all of a sudden you start getting a lot of those raw materials in, it can mitigate a lot of symptoms that we've slapped some disease name association.
Okay.
But you're still creating the issues of having only meat or only plant, where if you step back and instead of being like, oh, that's my favorite team, I'm always going to root for them, I don't care if the coach and every player change, that's my team forever, you say, hey, wait a minute. These plants and that and this, and if I mix them together, well, each thing's helping mitigate the downside of another, which is exactly how you make a great team. I've never gone to work for any place or started any company or been involved with anything and not had a good team of people, right? So yeah, we're just different parts of the food that's on your plate, and that's what makes it maximum nutrition.
Mm-hmm. I think, because as I was saying, I was like, well, you don't want to go full carnivore, you don't want to go full vegan or whatever. I guess a lot of it kind of depends on the body type too, and like what somebody is dealing with disease or sickness wise as well, right? Because like some things, like you have Lyme disease, you probably should avoid red meat,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There's definitely some triggers, right? And some are genetic as well, right? There's cases. There was a client I met with recently where she has the allele for holding on to extra iron. So she wants to be careful of how much iron she actually gets into her diet. So one of my recommendations was consuming coffees and teas, red wines, cacao, and these different tannin-based or tannin-containing compounds when she eats something that also has iron in it. And that way it chelates it and she doesn't absorb it. So she's using diet, she's using these anti-nutrients to prevent her from absorbing too much. At the same time, if you're, we've talked about the female cycle, there's certain points where consuming more iron is super beneficial. And at other points, it makes more inflammation and more reactive oxygen species. So if you're someone that eats red meat on a regular basis, well, during the beginning of the cycle, don't drink green tea, don't have red wine with it, don't eat some of these other tannin-based foods or cook them. If you're having beans, you want to soak those, you want to rinse them and then pressure cook. That's the best way to break those oxalates and phytates down.
Okay.
And then at the period where, too much iron's bad, that's when you throw in the extra beans or some green tea before or pair it with wine or something. So you can use these to cater your diet. And the same goes with anemic-like symptoms. So
Expound on that.
if you have anemic-like symptoms,
Which means you don't absorb enough iron, right?
It seems like you're not absorbing enough
Okay.
iron, where you've got cold hands, cold feet, you get dizzy when you stand up, you don't have a lot of energy, you've got pale skin, you start to lose your hair, and it can be any one of those or some combination. And even if your blood work looks fine, it still could be that you're not effectively using that iron or bringing enough new iron in. I've talked about one of the easiest fixes usually if your blood work's good for iron, and that's adding copper into your diet. Increasing copper allows you to pull the iron into the cell. Just because it's floating around in your blood doesn't mean that it's getting into the cell. If the copper's not there, you're not pulling it in. But if you have these bouts where it's not every time you stand up you get dizzy, and your hands and feet aren't cold all the time, but sometimes they are, it could definitely be associated with your diet. Where if you're trying to be healthy and you're like, I'm going to eat some of this raw broccoli and these raw carrots, I'm going to have more tea, or like, oh, it's been stressful, I'm going to start drinking some more coffee. It may not be immediate, but over a day or two, then a day or two later, that's when your body's like, oh, we didn't have enough stored, we didn't regulate this right. All that tea, all that broccoli, all those beans, all the whole wheat that you were consuming blocked iron absorption. So now it dipped enough that we've got to start pulling from our stores, but you still have the symptom, which is the stressor, the dizziness, the cold hands and cold feet, whatever that stressor is, to then tell your body to go start pulling from your stores. So anemic-like symptoms can come from your diet. But if you know that certain foods can have this effect, then you can mitigate that by pairing them or adding other foods in, and then right? Like, when was the last time you saw one of those vegetable trays and thought, that's not healthy?
Probably never.
Yeah. That seems like the healthiest, boringest thing you can bring to a party, right? But those raw vegetables, they don't want to be eaten, right? You take a bite, and it's like wasabi and, like a radish, or they've got like a bite. Well, as soon as you break that cell open, it releases these compounds to say, hey, stop eating me, right? It's like garlic and onion, right? The idea is that you're supposed to chop those and let them sit for a minute. And with garlic and onion, they're interacting with oxygen and creating beneficial compounds. Garlic and onion are also nutrient deliverers. So adding fresh garlic and onion to your food actually increases nutrient delivery.
Okay. Is nutrient delivery the same thing as absorption?
Yeah, in this context.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So if you're going to eat a little more raw broccoli or like the broccoli, if it's preventing iodine absorption, then pairing it with raw garlic or onions, or even if you cook and saute it, that's combating. Where now you've got some compounds that are trying to get the nutrients in, and then you've got others that are trying to keep it out, so it kind of mitigates it.
It creates a little bit of
Tug of war.
friction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so garlic and onion, I mean, over and over and over, I see benefits to these. I've been to conferences where the whole talk was on garlic.
Wow.
There's no wrong way to eat garlic, right? You can chop it, you can eat it raw, you can mince it, you can ferment it, you can mix it in with soups and broths. Like every single way, garlic does something awesome for you. So if you like garlic, I would highly suggest eating that on a regular basis. Same with onions.
Okay, cool. For anybody who had a thyroid problem, right? Because you talked a little bit about iodine. Iodine is found naturally in vegetables, right?
Some of them.
Some of them?
It's much, again, if minerals are not in the dirt or growth media, like for seaweed, the ocean, then it's not going to be in your food. Some plants require certain minerals, but most plants, especially in the way that we farm today, can get by with not having even a trace amount of most of these minerals.
Interesting. Okay.
So-
What role does that play on the thyroid?
So iodine.
I know there's a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So your thyroid produces a T3 protein and a T4, but it has iodine bound to that protein, and it can't function without it. So just like your red blood cells have an iron, and the iron is responsible for allowing binding to oxygen and release of oxygen. For your thyroid proteins, these hormones, they require iodine. Without it, they can't function. So if your iodine levels start to get too low, your thyroid doesn't function. Your thyroid's a master hormone, so it regulates it's part of that symphony that we talked about last time, right? Like it's a star in the play. Mm-hmm. Without it, things fall apart. So if you're consuming a lot of broccoli or beans or cruciferous vegetables or these compounds that don't let you absorb iron, including whole wheat, which is supposed to be super healthy, right?
Right.
Wheat, rye, barley, oats. Oats have a much smaller amount, but all of those prevent the absorption of iron and iodine, and sometimes zinc and copper and other trace minerals, molybdenum, selenium.
There's a lot.
There's a lot, right? So the idea is that we need to pay attention to those essentials, like I said with the essential minerals. So if you like seaweed, like they make delicious seaweed sheets, that should just be a normal, common snack for everybody. Seaweed, yeah.
Okay.
Even if you're just eating a small little square, I'll buy these big sheets, and then once a day, once every other day, I'll just tear a piece off, and I'll either add it into my meal or just eat it as is.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So with everything, there's a little bit of give and take. I think we've discussed, or maybe I came across this, but we were talking about how there's a lot of heavy metals in seaweed potentially.
Yeah.
So you got to be kind of careful about what seaweed you eat.
Yeah, it's the same with a lot of algae supplements. So depending on where the algae was grown and what was in the water, algae have a higher propensity to bind heavy metals. They can also help pull them out of your body. But for the most part, the standard seaweed sheets that are sold in most places around the world, they've been tested, at least roughly to some extent.
I hope so.
But seaweed is great at pulling arsenic and mercury and heavy metals out of the ocean, and that's where it grows. So if you're growing it in water that you're adding in, and you know the nutrient and elemental composition, then it's better. But yeah, I would never eat seaweed just straight out of the ocean.
Yeah, okay. Good to know.
Yeah. Fun fact.
Well, so kind of jumping to carcinogens. I was talking with a friend, and this was a long time ago, so I got to kind of pull from the fragments of my memory here. But basically, we were talking about mass gainers. I was telling him that I wanted to put on some size, and he told me that I needed to make my own mass gainer from like oats, whey protein, milk, add whatever and stuff like that, because some of the ingredients, when you combine them, if you look at like the ingredient or like label lists on some food, especially like mass gainers, he said that some of those things, when you mix them together, can become carcinogens in the body. Or am I just like making that up, or is there like some evidence to that?
Yeah, so there are some popular healthy foods that contain certain compounds that will interact with sugars. And once they interact, they can become carcinogen-like.
Right, like he said it like specifically like tapioca or starch or something like that. So something that was like very popular in mass gainers.
Yeah, so again, that's the carbohydrate source.
Okay.
So when you take meat and you sear it, what you're doing is you're using energy, heat, to add a sugar onto a protein.
And that's the charred.
And that's what gives that charring effect.
Okay.
And then that's what allows it to be carcinogenic, right? Because our cell membranes have an abundance of proteins that have sugars attached to them. That's actually how your blood type is derived, right? Whether it's A, B, or O. It's based on the sugar that's glycoprotein that's attached to your red blood cells.
Interesting. I had no idea.
So cells communicate with this like sugar attached to protein moiety. And because of that, it allows them to enter the cell, to communicate with the cell. It's something the cells already make. So when then you consume it from your diet, it can more easily get in and find its way to the DNA, and it can intercalate, or it can add itself in. And DNA needs to be able to expand and contract and then open up to make a copy of itself. And if you put something in, it changes the shape a little bit. So as the protein's coming along and reading it, it may misread it. If it misreads it, it could put the wrong amino acid in. If it puts the wrong amino acid in, the protein's now slightly different. So it could create a mutation. And it's not that the DNA is wrong, it's that the spacing, or there's an inappropriate chemical present that made grandma's cookbook
A faulty recipe.
Faulty recipe. And that's what creates that carcinogenic effect, because proteins do all the work. So if this protein's supposed to go out and put attack in every third spot, and now it starts putting attack in every fourth spot, well, now the structure is going to be different. And that may not have a dramatic effect, but it could be involved in like an upstream signaling process. So then everything that gets amplified downstream now has that faulty process, and then the problem begins to exacerbate, and the cell starts to go haywire. And for the most part, all humans are going to develop cancerous cells. If you eat the right foods and take care of yourself, and you sleep adequately, then your body has the ability to kill off those cancer cells. Mm-hmm. The hiccup is that, eating certain foods, combining them in certain ways, decreases your chances of being able to fight it off and creates more of those carcinogens.
Okay. So as you were talking about that, and you're talking about copying DNA so it can be replicated, I immediately thought of like having children. So maybe I'm like way off on this, so correct me if I'm just like steering the ship into a storm. But can you be eating the wrong food with like carcinogens, right? And it, places itself in the DNA where it shouldn't, right? And then you have children. Could that cause mutations or birth defects in children based off of eating a carcinogenic diet?
So you're...
Or am I just like, am I just swinging out to left field?
Your exploration with that logic is on point. It's perfect. It's ideal. The body has developed a few mechanisms to prevent a poor diet or a high stress being passed on.
Okay.
Little things like the blood-brain barrier. The other thing is the only genetic material you pass on is for males, your sperm cells, and then for women, the egg cells. Women produce all of their egg cells up front, and they're neatly tucked away. So other than aging and other factors that prevent the initial seeding, if you will, they're pretty well protected. So poor diets don't necessarily get passed on to the progeny,
Okay.
which is really nice. But there are things that you can do to, there are things you can do to protect your germline cells from passing on bad things. Because as men, we make lots of sperm every single day. Sperm requires a lot of zinc. You're eating a lot of whole wheat, you're eating a lot of soy, you're eating a lot of beans. Those all bind to zinc, and it reduces the available amount in your body, which is
Doesn't it it's estrogenic or something like that, like especially soy.
Yeah, so soy definitely is.
Okay.
Soy contains compounds that mimic estrogen. So just like we spoke about hormones, they float around, they bind to the outside of a cell, and they communicate to the inside. So if you have something that mimics an estrogen, then you're communicating the estrogen signal, even though your body didn't make estrogen and regulate it. You're getting it in from your diet.
Okay.
So again, if you're a woman and you're on your cycle and you're at a point where you're like, I need a little more estrogen, you can consume edamame. You can consume these soy-based products, and you can microdose your own estrogen in without getting like a HRT.
HRT?
Like hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, okay.
Menopause. I was like, oh, I know this. But for men, increasing minerals such as boron and zinc are two main players in ensuring that our sexual health has the minerals it needs for those cells to properly function. So when you start eating certain foods, like the wheats and the beans and even rices and oats, and you start increasing the amount of that in your diet to support growth, and you're not getting zinc and selenium and boron-rich foods in, then you're depleting your body of those minerals. So you're providing the signaling and the signal for, hey, there's food, let's build, let's do stuff, let's support hormones. But then if you don't have those raw minerals, then the proteins can't function. Certain proteins can't function, just like with your thyroid. There's not enough iodine, T3 can't be made, and T3 gets converted to T4. So if you don't have enough zinc, then your sperm levels start to decrease. So this is why things like oysters are an aphrodisiac. It's because they're packed full of zinc, and zinc is what does the majority of the heavy lifting. So increasing the amount of these minerals can have an immediate, like next day, same day effect on your physiology.
Is there a relationship between high levels of testosterone and high levels of sperm count?
I've read multiple studies where methods to increase testosterone also increase sperm count, sperm mobility. They tend to go hand in hand. There are some cases where you can arbitrarily increase testosterone.
Arbitrarily? Do you mean like what does that mean? Sorry.
So the body wants to create cholesterol. 80% of your cholesterol is made by you.
In-house.
Not from your diet, in-house. So it wants to make and regulate cholesterol, move that cholesterol into the mitochondria. That's the first rate limiting step for making your sex hormones. That makes your DHEA, and then it goes on and on and on to all these other hormones, and that makes your testosterone, estrogen, DHT. So if all that's regulated, then the body's like, okay, this is what we want to do based on what we have. So it's like you hire an engineer to come in and say, okay, we want to go there. How far can we get with the resources we have now? And it says, oh, this far? Okay, adjust the hormones accordingly. So when you start taking herbs or even just injecting testosterone, you're bypassing that regulatory mechanism that says, hey, we don't have the mitochondrial capacity to support the amount of growth that your testosterone is telling you to make. So you may feel better. You're still telling your cells to do it, but now you're just depleting them faster.
Okay.
So temporarily, you can have. You feel better. There's the mental, the cognition, the weight loss. For guys, it's pretty easy. As you support testosterone health, everything starts to work like
Function a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the same idea as the peptides, right? Whether you're pulling in a hormone from a cholesterol derivative, testosterone or estrogen, or you're pulling in a peptide like insulin or GLP-1 or BPC 157 or TB 500, right? The guy came in earlier and he was on a crutch and he's like, yeah, I'm taking the Wolverine stack and it's making me heal faster. And it's like, yeah, no, that's awesome. You're young. You still have all the raw materials in your bones and everywhere else to heal that. So the peptides come in and they say, hey, use these raw materials to do this. Great. You start to get older and your diet doesn't have those minerals, doesn't have enough essential amino acids, the right fats to build the mitochondrial health to make it happen. And now you can only go so far before you start creating inflammation because you're telling the cell to do something and it doesn't have everything it needs to do it. So that's what I mean by, there are studies that say, yeah, sure, you take more zinc and boron and exercise and sleep better and tonki alley and take these other herbs and it'll increase your testosterone, which then increases your sperm mobility and increases your likelihood of producing children. But just like anything else, right? You can put 30 people in your treehouse, but if you didn't build it to hold 30 people, something bad could happen.
Yeah, so you definitely need to invest in the raw materials.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. And so that's the whole idea of focusing on these anti-nutrients. It's not that a vegetable platter of raw vegetables or some good, like 10 bean chili soup is bad. It's just that certain foods contain anti-nutrients because plants don't want to be eaten. They're attempting to prevent you from eating them. So as people start going into the new year and start, listening to the new trajectory that America seems to be on of like, hey, we should eat more whole foods. Some of those whole foods come with a caveat of, I don't want to be eaten, so I'm going to fight back. So some of my go-tos, right, when I start cooking, chop everything up front. And that way your cruciferous vegetables, your carrots, your garlic, your onion, all that has time to sit out in the oxygen. We know that garlic and onion, the beneficial effects can increase over time, and then those anti-nutrients can start to break down. If I'm adding in beans or any sort of grain, I'll soak it first, and then I'll do like a pressure cooker or a rice cooker. I don't recall which one it was, but one of the anti-nutrients actually increases in the crock pot, and it's prevalent in beans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, but up front, if you can, wash it, you can soak it, and you can cook them up front a little bit, then that helps break some of it down.
How long should you be soaking something for? I'm assuming you probably soak it in hot water.
I mean, you can put it in hot water. Usually I just let it soak overnight. I mean, think about you get a can of beans and you open it up and that's generally the consistency that you want, right? They kind of started to split open. They're really soft, right? You can just take a can of black beans and pour it out and then you're like, oh, hey, look, I can mash this. The problem with cans is that they're lined with BPA or other types of plastic, which also mimic estrogen. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So the more you know, right? So if you get a can of beans, wash it. I still will take the can, put it in some water, fill it up, try and get an oversized bowl, and that way you can just start pulling a lot of that gunk out. And one argument I get sometimes, or not necessarily an argument, but a lot of times when I meet with clients, they'll say, well, if you cook your vegetables and your beans and
then you cook the anti-nutrients out.
Well, but you cook the nutrients out.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and you can lose some nutrients. So that's why, like with broccoli, if you can just steam it, or just boil it briefly, or you blanch it, right? You just dip it in boiling water for a moment and then pull it back out. That's enough to turn off or to break down some of those anti-nutrients without losing all the good stuff.
Okay.
So to me, if you're getting enough minerals in your diet, if you're taking supplements that have all these minerals in it, then it matters a little bit less. But the minerals aren't in our food like they used to be. So you've got to actively find ways to get those minerals in, or just be aware that many plants have anti-nutrients in it.
So that could be pulling away from, you could be eating a lot of good food, but it could be pulling away from the good food because, the anti-nutrients.
Exactly, yeah.
That was horribly put, but
Yeah,
that's why we have editing.
yeah. If you eat the bad, then there's bad. And yeah, so for me, one of the worst is coffee, right?
Okay.
Coffees and teas and chocolate. I don't drink a tremendous amount of red wine, but it's in the same boat where it contains these tannins that prevent mostly iron, but other minerals as well. So typically I'll have, a cup of coffee. And then after I finish my coffee, I'll have like a mineral bomb where I get extra magnesium and calcium and the trace minerals, and I'll add a little bit extra into my water or into my meal, for lunchtime.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. So is there a way to prepare your coffee or tea so that way it doesn't? Or is it just kind of one of those things where it's like, it's going to kind of deplete your nutrients irregardless?
Yeah. The tannins are harder to get rid of because, you're already adding hot water onto your ground beans, right? And they've already been roasted. They've already gone through a fermentation process. So these tannins are
They're hard to get rid of,
right?
And you said they're also in chocolate, right? Well, like the cacao bean?
Yeah, the cacao bean, right? And so I mentioned that sprouting and fermenting are great ways to reduce the amount of these anti-nutrients. And your coffees and your chocolate went through that whole process, right? Beans were opened up and they were fermented and then they were roasted, and now we add hot water and the tannins are still present. The oxalates and the phytates and these Georgians and these other compounds, these isothiocyanates are also broken down. They're not present in bean or in coffees and teas, but the tannins are still there.
Right.
And the tannins bind to iron. So if you have a green tea or some red wine with your steak or with your spinach salad, then you're reducing the iron. And spinach already, especially for those that don't consume a lot of meat, spinach and a lot of your leafy greens are a good go-to for iron, as long as you can add in an acid, something like ascorbic acid, vitamin C, because that moves the iron into a bioavailable state. It moves it from the 3+ to the 2+. In essence, it just donates an electron.
Okay.
And then that says, oh, hey, cool, I can pull you into the cell now. But then if you have green tea or one of these other compounds,
coffee,
then it's just going to pull out a red wine, right? Luckily for steak, there's an abundance of iron. For dairy, there's an abundance of calcium. So pairing nuts and seeds with cheese or yogurts can help mitigate those. But if you just have a spread and it's just a bunch of raw vegetables and then nuts and seeds and like some chickpeas and some like different types of beans, then that's all just anti-nutrient. If it's all raw and you're not pairing it with cheeses and meats and high sources of minerals, then you're like, oh, I'm being healthy, and you're just depleting yourself of minerals.
Interesting.
And then some will also bind to digestive enzymes and prevent you from digesting your food.
Yeah.
So like lectins, so back to beans, like you've got to soak them, you've got to pressure cook them, because they will tear holes in your gut.
Gosh.
They're fighting back.
Yeah. Good Gandhi. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really all I have on like anti-nutrients so far, but that's so cool that we can learn all that. And it makes sense. I think there was this celebrity who went like vegan or vegetarian or whatever it was, and ended up like losing, like he said that he ate a lot of spinach, which is very like high in iron, but they like when they tested his blood, there was like no iron in it, like next to nothing. And I wonder if that was because he was drinking like a lot of coffee and tea and stuff like that.
Well, spinach also has oxalates, which prevent the absorption of iron.
Oh, okay. So you got to cook that really well too, then.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so cooking it and then adding in other sources of iron. One of my good friends, he's a chef. He's got a master's in nutrition, and he's a vegan. His partner's a vegan bodybuilder, and like she's super strong. She's flexible. Like it's impressive, right? So I'm not trying to say that you can't do this strength power thing off of just plants, but she's got a personal chef at home that knows about these anti-nutrients and knows how to pair things and make it delicious in such a way that, you can have the same benefit and no carcinogens, lower inflammation. You don't have any of the downsides that come with meat.
Yeah.
But you've got to eat a lot. And this is another thing that I really think is important with the nutrition label. Because if I take 10 ounces of steak, it's got a certain amount of protein in it. And that protein has a bioavailability factor associated with it.
Okay.
If I take the same amount of peanut butter.
Well, can I pause you
chickpeas,
for a second?
yeah.
What does bioavailability mean?
So bioavailability is the amount of that protein or particular nutrient that you're actually going to absorb.
Okay. So like a percentage of what's on the label.
Correct.
Okay.
Right? So you look at a steak, it looks like protein, right? You chew it, digestive enzymes go to town, it breaks down, you turn it into amino acids, you absorb it, pretty much all of it. Plants also contain proteins. They're cells, proteins do all the work, but their proteins are embedded within a cell wall. And you've got all these mechanisms that try to prevent you from eating it. And as soon as the cell wall is ruptured, it fights back. So the likelihood that you're going to break down all those cell walls and all those membranes and be able to extract that protein out of the plant is decreased. And that's why the bioavailability of protein in plants is less than it is for most animal-based proteins.
That makes sense. Okay.
So I think on a nutrition label, because nobody wants to do the math every time of like, oh, this is okay, it's mostly rice, and then there's some chia seed, and then there's this plant, and there's this plant, and now I've got to guess how much of that each of those is there, and then guess how much, or do the math for the bioavailability to find out that if I'm consuming 2 scoops of this, and it says it's 22 grams of protein, but because it's from plant, it may not be as bioavailable, so now I'm not actually getting 22 grams of protein. So if you're eating a plant-based diet and you're trying to hit that protein mark, you have to eat way more than you think because the protein is reduced due to the inability to actually get it in because it's all wrapped up in fiber.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So the same benefit of fructose being wrapped up in fiber is you have a slow breakdown and absorption of it, and you may not get all of it. But the same thing goes for protein. If you're pulling the protein out of a fiber-rich plant, then you've got to fight to get the protein. You've got to break more of it down. It's going to be a slower release.
What are some examples of like fiber-rich plants that would protect the proteins?
Pretty much any plant.
Just any plant? Okay, okay.
Really any plant. Okra is probably one of my favorite, right? Where if you take raw okra and you start eating it or even just chopping it up, it just immediately becomes slimy, right? And that's its way of being like, no, don't eat me, right? But even just spinach, right? There's the whole cell wall is an additional barrier that prevents the stuff on the inside from getting out. You can think of a human cell almost like a sandwich bag, and then a plant cell like a sandwich bag inside of a sandwich bag, right? It's got a second barrier that's preventing stuff from getting in, which is great if you go, floating and then your lunch falls in the river. You're like, oh, it's double bagged, so like
We're good
it's
to
probably
go.
still fine, yeah. But human cells just rupture easier, or meat-based proteins rupture easier, so then you can get more out of it. So I think on nutrition labels, they should have an adjustment for bioavailability.
Okay.
So that way okay, well, there's a total of 20 grams of protein in here.
But I'm probably only going to consume 75% due
Exactly.
to, okay.
Yeah.
Um, are there like are there certain things you can do to increase your bioavailability? Like, what comes to my mind is like stomach acid, right? It's really good at like breaking down things, and so that way your body can utilize them. Um, is there like, does bioavailability like, does it differ for each person?
Not only does it differ for each person, but it can differ for a given individual over time.
Okay.
So you have a particular gut microbiome, and we know that it's adaptable. If you eat 2 kiwis tonight, and I measure your gut microbiome today, and I measure it tomorrow morning, we can measure a difference. So it does change. But as you start changing your diet, and you say, okay, it's the new year, I'm gonna eat healthier, so I'm gonna start throwing in these vegetables and buying this stuff that I don't normally buy, then at first you're not gonna get as much from it because the gut bacteria necessary to break down that increased volume of fiber hasn't quite yet built up to the point that you can just eat it and it's all beneficial. Additionally, if you're not preparing it correctly, if you're just knocking back raw tomatoes and you're jacking up your gut barrier, you're gonna be like, yeah, I try to eat more vegetables, but they just hurt my gut, right? So there's definitely a change that needs to take place at the gut microbiome. And then also, as you eat different foods, it's important to realize that every molecule has the potential to change the chemistry of some reaction in your body. So as you can,
It's almost kind of a scary thought.
yeah, it's insane that the body can. We're so resilient yet squishy, right? Feed and water yourself, you move a little bit, and for the most part, things work just fine. But the more you start diving down into it, you're like, how are we even alive? There's so many things, and the body's pretty resilient. But over time, if you're eating a lot of these foods that you're not used to eating, you've got to give your body time to adapt. And you also want to mitigate any deleterious compounds that are coming with those foods, right? The oxalates, the phytates, so on. And then once you've got the time-based aspect, then now your body can start saying, okay, we're getting more of these nutrients out, we're getting them consistently. Now it's going to start changing other factors. And we know that plants have a lot of antioxidants and beneficial polyphenols, which support mitochondrial health, which then ties back into your hormones. So as your hormones start to change and that landscape changes, then it feeds back into your ability to produce more of your own GLP-1 because you're less stressed because inflammation went down. So it's, kind of like a board game. We should make a board game out of this, right? Where it's like, I only eat, these foods that you're assigned to by a roll of a dice or draw the card, right? And then over time, as the board game goes on, you pick a certain diet type, and then you see how you end up at the end. Yeah, this would be a fun fighting game, like Xbox 2. I'm sitting here having to fight broccoli and steam it or something. You're like, okay, yeah, now it's good, right? So, if anybody has good game developing skills, reach out. We can talk. But this idea is that your body has all these adapting aspects to it, right? You start eating the new food. And let's say it's got your broccoli and your sulforaphane and these sprouts and more fermented foods, and that's lowering your stress. And then because you're lowering your stress and you're changing your gut microbiome, you can now digest more of those foods, and then the benefit continues to increase. Inflammation's down, your mitochondria are supported, they're healthier, they start producing different hormone regulation. Part of that hormone regulation ties back into things like GLP-1 production. So now you're slowing down digestive processes enough to the right amount where you can have more time to break down that fiber, to break down those nutrients, and then get more out of it. But this goes to, I saw this paper recently demonstrating that users of GLP-1 drugs are experiencing issues where they're slowing down the food in their digestive tract to such an extent that they're fermenting the food and it's there for 24 hours. It's there way longer than it's supposed to. So then they're getting all of these you open your fridge and you're like, what is that?
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
happening inside because the food's there for too long.
Oh.
Humans are omnivores, right? We can't eat meat. We can't eat plants. People argue about which one's better, more, or whatever. They're all made out of cells. They're all alive. They don't want to die. But in any case, we have the digestive tract length that we do, and there's a certain passage time. So when you start taking these Ozempic-like drugs and you're slowing down digestion too much, it can cause problems. But as you start getting a more fiber-rich meal, it's going to naturally start to go a little bit slower. But that's because fibers need more time to ferment,
break down.
digest. So if you've been eating a mostly like American standard diet, most of your vegetables are already like some cute lettuce and tomato on your burger, or like some canned green beans. Like there's not a whole lot there. So your gut microbiome really has to change. And so this whole process can take anywhere from like 3 to 6 months or years.
Yeah. On kind of a personal note, as you were learning all of these things, I think everybody wants to be the healthiest, right? And we all want to gain knowledge in order to become like the best, healthiest versions of ourselves. Obviously, you have a lot of knowledge in this field, but do you ever get like discouraged with like the amount of information that comes in? You ever just look at that like mountain of information and you're like, oh, where do I begin?
Yeah, that's something I hear quite often where people will say, man, I'm so excited. I got to listen to everything that you're saying, but very little of it stuck, right? There was an hour and a half that you were going on, and now it's just like, I don't even know what to do. And you're like, who am I? Like, what is all this? And that's the reason that we have podcasts. That's the reason I'm creating all these things to try to get more bite-sized information out. I think the biggest takeaway is these are subtle lifestyle changes. And even if you've been ignorant, you're still going to want to be healthy 10, 20, 30 years from now. So it's all about making those little changes and trying not to get too overwhelmed, right? Really, if you can just try to be curious, like kids have this sense of awe. I think I never grew out of that. I just feel like a big kid, right? I'll hear something, and just like you, my first response is, oh, that's awesome. Like, no way. And I just want to sit in the beauty of it for a second. Like, whoa. Like, I'll read a research paper. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then I've got to switch over to my science brain and be like, okay, let's critique it, and let's, did this experiment actually, does this data support their conclusion, so on and so forth. But yeah, it definitely can be overwhelming.
Say like something says this plant has 20 grams of protein, right? But you can only break down 15 grams of protein, so you lose 25% due to the plant's bioavailability, right? Or is it due to us in like our own kind of internal like stomach acid, like
Combination of both.
okay, so like in that case, like, is the reason why they don't put bioavailability on things is because a lot of it is personal and it depends on our own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
There's definitely ranges, right, where, if you took a cohort of individuals and fed them a particular food, here's the amount of protein that you could expect to get out. Like here, you measure it going in, you measure it coming out, and you're like, okay, here's what didn't get digested. And then you can get a range for that. So there definitely is a individual aspect to bioavailability. Again, if you eat a lot of a certain type of food, you're going to have more of the processes to break that down. If you eat on a consistent basis, if you eat when you're not stressed, those are all factors that can influence bioavailability. And then also what food you pair it with. So yeah, like quick fun facts, using garlic and ginger can help increase bioavailability. Oh. Lowering inflammation by adding like sprouts, like these broccoli sprouts, can increase bioavailability. Drinking enough water and adding in salts and minerals, your electrolytes with that water, can help flush out some of your oxalates, because those can have like joint problems and drive kidney stone formation because the oxalates will bind to calcium and then they create little crystals. And as they build up, as crystals do, you now have kidney stones. So drinking enough water while consuming compounds or consuming oxalate-rich foods, and then of course fermenting. Like if you take wheat, right? We've been told whole wheat is like the gold standard. It's like the healthy thing. But wheat has a lot of lectins and oxalates and phytates and different compounds in it that prevent absorption. But when you turn it into sourdough, you can drop those down by about 90%.
Wow.
Because you've introduced bacteria that will ferment or break down those plant compounds, right? They have to go through the battle first. The plants fight back, bacteria win, your bread rises, and then you can eat the sourdough, which is a probiotic, and you've broken down all those wheat-based compounds. So for a lot of people I know that have trouble eating bread, it may not be from gluten. It could be from gluten. Gluten's a pretty large protein that is acid and digestive enzyme resistant. But if you feed it to the bacteria in the sourdough first, they do some pre-digestion, so then it's easier for you to eat.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So fermenting and then sprouts is one of my favorite goes-tos. So these are broccoli sprouts. The lid here is just a screen. So I took like 2 tablespoons of seeds, broccoli seeds, and I put them in here. I soaked it in water overnight, just up to like there. And then the next day I poured it out, and then twice a day I just put water in, swirl it, pour it out, set it on this cool stand. Shout out to Tyler Price for the setup here. And it water drops, and then they just grow. And then so this is about 4 or 5 days of growth. And it was full, but several times a day I'll just walk over, open the jar, and I just pull some out and I eat it. Mm-hmm. So anytime that I eat a food that could potentially have something that detoxing or inhibiting carcinogens could be beneficial, I'll just grab some, eat it. You can throw it in your salad. When there's a whole bunch of it, you can throw it in with like a smoothie and other stuff, and that helps get those compounds in without having the flavor of it. Mm-hmm. So sprouting and then fermenting are some of the best ways to reduce those plant-based compounds. Those anti-nutrients. Which again, back to wintertime, if you're eating more of those foods, and then vinegar, right? If you're storing foods for winter, you're fermenting, you're doing high salt, which usually contains lots of other minerals, and then, vinegar rich. So the vinegar is breaking down the anti-nutrients, the fermentation is breaking down the anti-nutrients, and now you're getting all these benefits during wintertime from eating preserved food via harvest versus just always going to Walmart. So, back to your statement of like, you think humans have already figured out how to combat this, and it's like, we did, we just broke the system by eating all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep, and then the last thing I want to talk about is reading a nutrition label, right? If you look at a nutrition label, it tells you the weight of every single ingredient on there, right? It says there's this many milligrams of vitamin C, and there's this many, IUs of vitamin D, and there's this much this compound, and there's, 100 milligrams of dried acai, or whatever's in it. You can add all of those up and then weigh the pill. Get a little scale and weigh it. And then that'll tell you how much filler or junk or fiber is in your pill.
Hold on one sec. So some people just hopped in the hot tub. Are we still good?
I think so, yeah.
We're not going to get them on accident? Oh, okay. I was like, just...
Right in front of these 2 windows.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, filler. So everything else is filler. If you can add all those up, and if it doesn't equal 100%, you know that there's a certain percentage that is filler.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the biggest problem is that filler, like cellulose, the same stuff that's in your Parmesan, that's already powdered, is sawdust. It's cellulose. Okay. Right? It's the part of the plant that you can't digest. And the logic was initially, well, if we're putting this fiber in, it's preventing digestion so those nutrients can get through your digestive tract because the enzymes are busy interacting with the fibers. And okay, sure, I can buy that from a mass balance like processing flow. But oftentimes there's way more. I mean, I've seen some where, clients will send me these supplements and there's 6,000% more filler than there is supplement.
Okay, yeah, I was about to ask that. I'm like, what if it reaches like a crazy high amount,
Yeah,
like
super
2,000, yeah.
Yeah, tons of it. And sometimes it can be cellulose derived from a plant that's very rich in glyphosate, so Roundup. So now you're actually adding more poison in than you are the thing you paid for. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to, supplements and to make sure that what you're spending your money on is what you want and not a bunch of filler. And then to also realize that because it's mostly filler, that's why it costs what it does. So when you go into Walmart or you go into Bucked Up or you go into these stores and you're like, oh, jackpot, I can get this on Amazon and it's only $30. And then you go look at some of these other supplements and you're like, they want $75 for this? Like, I can get it for half price. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, yeah, but there's some supplements out there that are designed to be good for you and there's zero filler. So that's why it costs more, is because they put nutrients and things in that support the absorption instead of just putting in a filler that's a waste product for some other field that they're just selling off trying to get rid of. And you're now the end product.
Yeah.
Where you're consuming something that otherwise you wanted, unless they snuck it into a supplement as just a filler, a natural flavor, a whatever.
What's that old saying? It's like, if it's cheap or it's free, you're the product.
Yeah, 100%. So that's how most supplements work. And there's some that are crazy expensive, way more than they need to be. And, maybe that's paying for R&D or whatever. But there's definitely some mid-tier, some ones out there that are really important. But I think that that's something that everybody can do, is just do the math. And we've got ChatGPT now. You can literally take a picture of it and you can say, weigh this for me. Because, there's milligram, but then there's also a microgram, MCG.
MCG, microgram.
That's a microgram.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's like 6 zeros there. It's a very, very small amount that you'd weigh on the scale. Most scales, your average scale won't have 6 decimal places.
Okay.
Right. So the amount that you're getting is minuscule. And then you add it in with all that filler and you're pretty much not getting. You feel good because you bought it, but it's junk.
Yeah.
So on top of eating healthy food and knowing which anti-nutrients are combating your progress, I think it's also important that when you start going to get supplements, just because you got a good deal on it doesn't mean it's actually helping you. And if you can get more value for finding something that's better, that's going to have that bioavailability, then to me it's worth it, right?
Yeah,
to
that makes
support
sense.
your health.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my big takeaway for the day.
No, I think that was awesome. I learned a lot. And now I'm going to. I already look at like labels, pretty with a scrutiny,
Yeah.
And now I'm just going to do that even more. Yeah. So it's good to know.
And there's something. Yeah, it's just the more you learn, like juicing.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh.
You just took an enormous amount of a plant that doesn't want to be eaten and put it into a liquid form so you can consume a tremendous amount of it, more so than you could if you were just eating, because the fiber would slow it down, because the fiber triggers GLP-1. And so all of these anti-nutrients, you're just dumping in through your whole digestive tract. And so tons of like tomato juice, if there's seeds and skins and there's any sort of like oxalates or phytates in these foods, then you're now scrubbing and removing all of those good nutrients that you may want to have. And because it's a fluid, it's going to move faster. And you're just pulling all of that out. Now, there's a lot of healthy polyphenols that are in plants. So an occasional juice could have more benefit than not. But regular or excessive juicing, you're definitely stripping yourself of minerals.
Okay.
So it's one of those other caveats where it seems really healthy, but if you're not doing it the right way, then it can have a deleterious effect.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's kind of all the time we have for now.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah, that's good. So
Okay.
again, if anybody's interested in getting a personalized like meal plan or learning how their typical diet can be adjusted or tweaked, feel free to reach out. Happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks again. See you next week.
Yep.